Hi, I just want to share with you some thoughts about a New Testament character called Tychicus. Not a particularly well-known character in the New Testament, and it's a bit of a reminder that mission often depends on unsung heroes. Tychicus, his name means destined. Not really a well-known character, personality in the Bible. Just from the few references there are of him in the New Testament, we realise that he was an unsung hero, and yet also a key member of Paul's apostolic ministry team. Tychicus was a convert from one of Paul's missionary trips into Asia, modern day Turkey. And the first time we encounter Tychicus in the New Testament is in Acts 20 verse 4, where he's mentioned as one of several men who were travelling companions of Paul during his third missionary journey. And it was a difficult time for Paul. He was travelling back from Macedonia to find his way to Jerusalem, and there were many plots and threats against Paul at that time. So probably really quite a risky undertaking for Tychicus to be associated with Paul. And for a time the travelling companions separated from Paul because Paul was aware of a threat to his life, and so they went on to Troas while Paul sought to elude this plot against his life. And then Paul rejoined Tychicus and the others back in Troas, ready for a journey to Jerusalem via Miletus on a ship. Towards the end of Paul's life, he ended up in prison, as many of you will be aware. And at that time, there was a bit of stigma attached to Paul being in prison. And so there were those who disassociated themselves from Paul, but not Tychicus. He remained loyal to Paul. He was a faithful man, diligently carrying out all of Paul's instructions. And one of those areas was, of course, that Paul no longer had the freedom to visit the many churches that he had apostolic input into. So Tychicus became his ears, his eyes, his voice in reporting in with the churches that Paul had covering over. And Paul, you can imagine, had to have a lot of trust and confidence in Tychicus in order to give him that kind of level of responsibility. So let's just listen in to Paul's letters, some of his words about Tychicus to the letter to the church in Ephesus. And it's Ephesians 6:21-22. To bring you up to date, Tychicus will give you a full report about what I'm doing, how I'm getting along. He's a beloved brother and a faithful helper in the Lord's work. And I've sent him to you for this very purpose, to let you know how we're doing and to encourage you. It is highly probable that Tychicus was not just mentioned in the letter to the Ephesians, but probably was the bearer of that letter to that church. And he travelled with the letter to add to the reporting person and to encourage the local believers while Paul was under arrest with a very uncertain future ahead of him. The same thing also happened with the letter to the Colossians. You find that in chapter 4 verses 7-9. Very similar thing said, that Tychicus was sent by Paul along with the letter to that church to encourage them. Then in 2 Timothy 4:12 we read of Tychicus being sent on an errand once again by Paul to Ephesus while Paul was in prison. And only Luke had remained with Paul as his companion. So as soon as Tychicus returned from one journey, Paul would then often dispatch him again on an additional errand. And in Titus 3:12, this time potentially there was the thought of Paul sending Tychicus to support his apostolic protege Titus in Crete while Paul travelled to Nicopolis for the winter. So there are four characteristics that we see from these few references to him in the New Testament. And I think they're great qualities for any team player to have in Christian service. First of all, there's this deep, warm relationship that Paul had with Tychicus, where he said Tychicus was a highly regarded brother in Christ. Great apostolic leaders need people in their world that will support them, that will be there for them, watching their back, whatever the circumstances. Teams do not function well unless people are prepared to serve with a sense of love and brotherhood, and obviously to make it contemporary sisterhood, where there are women often now involved in ministry teams. The second thought was that Tychicus was a faithful helper or servant. The word used in the Greek is the same that we use for deacon. So Tychicus was willing to serve in whatever role Paul gave him to do. Paul could not achieve much due to his confinement, so Tychicus' servant heart was really invaluable to him, as you could imagine. And then the third one is that Tychicus knew what his purpose was, and he was comfortable in who he was. He did not aspire to be another Paul. He knew who he was. He was content to serve the apostolic ministry of Paul without having his own agenda. He was willing to go wherever Paul sent him. And then fourthly, he was an encourager. Tychicus could be counted on to raise the morale of the Colossians and the Ephesian believers. He must have possessed a really positive can-do attitude and motivation to be given that role, to go and speak on behalf of Paul. Every church needs a people that are like Tychicus, dedicated team players who love to serve without ego or without complaint. They don't strive to usurp the apostolic vision. They just live to serve the vision of another leader because they have kingdom mindset and they have kingdom values. Are you that kind of person? Are you that person that your leader can count on? Are you that kind of person that just serves without an agenda, just because you love God and you love the people around you? You love your leadership and you just love to serve those leaders in your life. May God bless you as you become one of those unsung heroes for your church and for your neighborhood. Bless you. Bye-bye.